For a disabled person living within medieval society, there weren't that many institutions available to them, so most stayed at home in their own communities where they could be looked after by family, friends, or neighbours. However, unlike today, the medievals had their own social and cultural beliefs and language which was devoid of the all-encompassing words disabled or handicapped. In medieval England, they were the dumb, the deaf, the blind, the lame, the leper, the cripple, the fool, and the lunatic. But what if they couldn't stay in their communities? Where did these people fit into society? Let's travel back in time and take a look at how the disabled survived during the Middle Ages.
So, you think you know everything about knights, castles, and kings? Well, hold on to your chainmail because we're starting a history channel all about the Roman Empire. Now, I know what you're thinking, wait, Roman Empire, isn't that before my favourite medieval legends? Well, yes, but stick with me. Rome is where it all started. From the fall of the mighty empire to the rise of your medieval knights, it's a story that's all connected. So if you're ready to learn about this incredible time period, join the toga party over at our new channel, The Roman Empire. It's going to be totally worth the detour in your historical journey, so I'll leave a link to it in the description below. And now for today's video, welcome to Medieval Madness.
It's a sin. In the early Middle Ages, with its high levels of poverty, Christianity was still quite one-dimensional, and as far as the church was concerned, human deprivation was proof of man's sinfulness and backsliding. This hardly brought out feelings of empathy and charity from the medievals for those less fortunate, such as the widows, orphans, weak, crippled, or even just the old. It was a duty to give alms to the poor, but that was more about ensuring the salvation of the person doing the donating, rather than the poor wretch who received the money. In 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council addressed a number of issues, including the treatment of Jews and heretics, the organization of the church, and the decree that standardized the practice of confession that has been called, quote, perhaps the most important legislative act in the history of the church. It emphasized the belief that spiritual health was more important than medical well-being, stating, quote, since bodily health is sometimes caused by sin, we declare in the present decree and strictly demand that when physicians of the body are called to the bedside of the sick, before all else they admonish them to call for the physician of souls, the cleric, so that after spiritual health has been restored to them, the application of bodily medicine may be of greater benefit, for the cause being removed, the effect will pass away. It's easy to see that in medieval Christianity there is an unspoken implication that the disabled person himself is somehow to blame for resisting a cure, and that for the medievals there was a link between sin and a person's outward appearance. To them, the incompleteness of a disabled person's body somehow represented the immorality of their soul, which of course is an incomprehensible attitude to our modern mindset. As there is no medieval equivalent linguistic term for the word disability, author and historian Irina Metzler, who has written several books on the subject, believes that we should use the word impairment instead. So these impairments can be fit into three categories. Sensory, which includes the deaf and the blind, physical for other parts of the body, and mental for cognitive disabilities and mental illness. Bourgeois Pig. So what did the medievals really think of the physically impaired? In 1425, an anonymous Parisian reported the following as a form of entertainment. Quote, the last Sunday of the month of August there took place an amusement at the residence called Darmac in the Rue Saint-Honoré, in which 4 blind people, all armed each with a stick, were put in a park, and in that location there was a strong pig that they could have if they killed it. Thus it was done, and there was a very strange battle, because they gave themselves so many great blows with those sticks, that it went worse for them, because when the stronger ones believed that they had hit the pig, they hit each other, and if they had really been armed, they would have killed each other. The Saturday evening before the aforementioned Sunday, the said blind people were led through Paris all armed, a large banner in front where there was a pig portrayed, and in front of them a man played a bass drum. It's not difficult to see that the show was not so much about killing the pig as watching the four blind men, quote, perform by injuring one another. The way that they were processed through the streets the night before was a way to advertise the spectacle and draw in as many onlookers as possible for the following day's performance. The deliberate cruelty with which they were humiliated in this way will shock people today. And it was not a one-off incident. In fact, this mocking of the blind happened regularly in medieval France. Other manuscripts and illustrations exist that show this sort of scene alongside other public shows, such as cockfights and juggling, as though it is an unremarkable occurrence. It's probably not a surprise to find out that the Normans used blinding as a punishment both in France and England after the conquest. And it's likely not a coincidence then that the Normans began to establish the building of hospitals specifically for the blind. It was usually kings, lords, and those with wealth who founded hospices and hospitals that housed the poor and sick. Ironically, William the Conqueror, a man known for blinding his enemies, was among those who built those sort of specialized hospitals. A change of heart. Early historian and Bishop Gregory of Tours and Saint Bishop Fortunatus both mention many leprous and feeble-minded people. They also talk about blind people in large numbers, but it wasn't really until the appearance of St. Francis of Assisi at the end of the 12th century that we reach a turning point in attitudes towards the poor, sick, and disabled. Assisi founded the Franciscan order and nursed lepers. He considered himself no friend of Christ if he did not, quote, cherish those for whom Christ died, and preached, quote, your God is of your flesh, he lives in your nearest neighbour, in every man. Following these several corporal works of mercy, which include feeding the hungry, giving shelter to the homeless, and visiting the sick, nuns and monks sheltered strangers, pilgrims, and the infirm, considering it to be part of their Christian duty. These passing pilgrims, many of them disabled, and the poor usually stayed for just one night, but over time many were allowed to stay for longer and longer periods until they either recovered or died. This type of nursing care had been going on in-house for centuries as the monks and nuns cared for their own. The monastery of Whitby in Yorkshire was described as having a building, quote, to which they used to take those who were infirm or who seemed to be at the point of death, as early as the 7th century. The St. Mary Magdalene Hospital in nearby Ripon saw changes in its function from a leper house to accommodation for blind priests, as leprosy cases declined at the end of the 1300s. Other houses also cared for specific patients, like the Hospital of St. Mary within Cripplegate in London. It was founded in 1331 by William Elsing, a merchant, and became known as the Elsing Spital. William wanted blind and paralysed priests to take preference over any other patients. Chatham Hospital in Kent tended to epileptic and blind nuns and monks, but other places were not so selective. At St. James's Hospital in Chichester, there were, quote, 6 cripples, 2 people without legs, and 2 idiots. More and more hospitals began to be built either based in or near to religious institutions. Some were specialized in leprosy or physical disabilities. In France, King Louis IX founded many hospices and houses, including the Quinze-Vingts in 1254, specifically for 300 blind men. Almshouses also provided a compassionate place for the disadvantaged to live, offering shelter for widows, the poor, and the elderly. In England, St. John's Hospital in Kent was one of the first to be built. It was founded around 1085 by Lanfranc, the first Norman Archbishop of Canterbury. At first, the hospital housed about 80 lame, weak, and infirm men and women who were, quote, oppressed by various kinds of infirmities, and therefore unable to survive in mainstream society. The inmates were given 24-hour care by the priest from the nearby priory of St. Gregory the Great. Just a few miles away in Harbledown, Archbishop Lanfranc had already established the Hospital of St. Nicholas to house 60 lepers. King Henry II donated an annual allowance of 20 marks to the lepers of Harbledown as part of his restitution for the murder of Thomas Becket in 1170. The king also paused at the hospital on his way to Canterbury Cathedral, where he went on pilgrimage to do penance. By the 14th century, leprosy had practically been eradicated, and the hospital was converted into almshouses for the poor. By the end of the late Middle Ages, Canterbury had 9 hospitals. London had about 35, as did York, including St Leonard's, said to be the largest in the north of England, and St Nicholas's Hospital for Lepers, built just outside the city walls. St Leonard's housed 232 people in 1399 and was run by Augustine monks. Many other hospitals were tiny in comparison, some no bigger than a cottage. Contagious. Some medievals weren't just born with a disability, they might have developed one through an accident or from years of back-breaking work. Others were afflicted by diseases such as leprosy. Between the year 1200 and the 1350s, leprosy was a common problem. The infection, known today as Hansen's disease, can cause lesions, gangrene, the loss of fingers, toes, and the nose, blindness, ulcerations, and weakness of the skeleton in its extreme form. The earliest example of a leper hospital thought to be built in England was St Mary Magdalene at Winchester. An excavation revealed that remains of the building, which was constructed about a mile outside of the city, were dated to somewhere between 960 and 1030. In England, at least 329 leper or Lazar hospitals and religious houses, also known as leprosaria, were established between the late 11th and mid-14th centuries. Often built outside towns and cities, they were usually still within walking distance, as lepers needed human contact to beg for money and trade and offer their prayers for the souls of their patrons. The use of a bell to warn people that a leper was coming near was used more to draw attention than to warn of their approach. Some people believed that lepers were closer to God because they were suffering purgatory here on earth and would go directly to heaven when they died. Giving alms to them would help to reduce the benefactor's own time in purgatory. For the most part, lepers were treated with Christian compassion and not completely segregated. However, there were exceptions, such as the slaughter of lepers in southern France in 1321, when, quote, unhealthily in body and unsane in mind, they were accused of an evil plan to poison the waters, fountains, and wells to infect healthy men. Sadly, many were arrested and burnt to death on trumped-up charges. When the Black Death ravaged Europe in the middle of the 14th century, in some areas lepers were accused of spreading the disease. Fear of infection had unleashed a wave of hatred, blame, and violence against both priests and the disabled alike. In 1346, the same year that the plague began to spread, King Edward III of England banned lepers from the capital. But leprosy was on the decline, perhaps due to an increased immunity within the population. Many leper houses either fell into disrepair or became almshouses and hospitals for other sick and disabled citizens. Having the advantage. One blind old man from Aix-en-Provence in France would not pray for his sight to return, saying, quote, "Why do I need the vision I lost so long ago? It is worth more to me to be deprived of it than to have it. Blind I can beg and none will repulse me. Rather they hasten to attend to my needs. But if I got my sight back, it would seem wrong for me to beg alms, even though I am old and weak and cannot work." So this implies that being disabled had an advantage over the poor or elderly, at least when it came to begging, as they often took precedent for being objects of pity and compassion when receiving Christian charity. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you enjoyed this video, as we do release a new one every Friday. So until next time, I hope all of you have an absolutely awesome week. Cheers everyone!